Everything has gone to shit. Outclassed and outgunned. We can't catch up. People are getting desperate.
Wolfenstein has quite the heritage. It was 1992 when id Software released Wolfenstein 3D, which helped pioneer and popularise the 3D first-person shooter genre that we still know and love to this day. With that in mind, MachineGames had a tough task in creating a game that lives up to the legacy, so how does Wolfenstein: The New Order fare in this regard? Well, it's not quite the innovative, jaw-dropping game like Wolfenstein 3D was back in its day, but that doesn't stop The New Order from being a damn fine shooter in its own right. Set in an alternate history 1960 in which the Nazis won the Second World War before going on to conquer the world, Wolfenstein: The New Order once again casts players as American OSA agent BJ Blazkowicz, and sees you joining up with a small resistance movement in an attempt to hunt down and kill General Deathshead and take back the world from the Nazis. Going in, I wasn't expecting a particularly good narrative, nor did I feel a game like this really needed one, but I have to say that I actually came away pleasantly surprised. Narratively, it's by no means a masterpiece, but it did feature reasonably well-written dialogue, great voice acting, and overall just a really high level of quality to the presentation. But in terms of tone, it's all over the place. One moment a character will be reflecting on his life before the war and how the Nazis aren't so different from the people he encountered back then. The next you're dual-wielding laser guns, exploding enemies' heads like watermelons, and fighting robot Nazis. Some may find this back and forth between the more silly elements and the more serious to be a bit off-putting, but personally it didn't bother me all that much. Really, it comes down to how much you value good narrative in your games. If you're playing Wolfenstein: The New Order purely for its story, then you may find its shortcomings and inconsistencies more glaring, but if, like me, you just want a fantastic shooting experience first and foremost, and see a good narrative as a bonus to that, then I think Wolfenstein is exactly what you're looking for. Rather than opting for the 2-weapon limit, regenerating health, slow, cover-based gameplay that's present in so many of today's shooters, Wolfenstein keeps things decidedly old school. You can carry pretty much your entire arsenal of guns at once, you'll scavenge the environment for health packs and armor pickups, and the gameplay is good old run-and-gun Nazi blasting action, made all the more satisfying by the way heads and limbs are blown off by gunfire, and bodies are ripped into a million bloody chunks from grenade explosions. Pretty much every weapon can be dual-wielded too. Pistols, assault rifles, even sniper rifles can be used 2 at a time if you so desire, but there's little more satisfying than tearing down a corridor with 2 automatic shotguns, absolutely obliterating both Nazis and the surrounding environment. For all its big, brash, explosive gunplay though, this game actually features a functional, though not entirely deep, stealth system. Players are free to equip a suppressor on their pistol and sneak through the levels quietly headshotting and stabbing enemies. It's actually pretty fun, and the perk system encourages players to at least give stealth a try. Normally, when talking about a game like Wolfenstein, the words perk system would set off alarm bells, but it's actually okay in this instance. The rewards are simply minor things like being able to crouch walk faster, increasing the amount of knives you can carry, or the ability to regenerate health by performing knife takedowns, and several of these perks will most likely unlock without you even realising you are working towards them. Others will require you to go out of your way to unlock, but they merely encourage more experimentation in your playstyle, and playing without the unlocks doesn't really hinder the experience. Honestly, I kind of forgot about the perk system for the most part because I was enjoying myself regardless. I also enjoyed the nice amount of variety to the levels as players visit a number of locations including Nazi-occupied London, Berlin, a mental asylum, a medieval castle and more. Wolfenstein: The New Order's globe-spanning adventure is fairly linear, but some levels, more so than others, offer some choice in pathway and let the player tackle a number of rooms in whichever order they prefer. Don't expect big sandboxes, but at least the maps are a bit more open in this game compared to a lot of other modern shooters. Unfortunately, the performance in some of the more open areas is a bit erratic, with the frame rate dropping into the 30s and 40s. With some tweaks to the graphic settings, it's possible to get the game running at a fairly consistent 60 frames per second, but the game's visuals are a bit subpar, definitely not good enough to justify the poor performance on the higher graphic settings. Speaking of settings, as this is a PC review, it makes sense to take a look at what the game offers in terms of options. As for graphics, you have the basics like resolution, VSync, the choice of full screen, windowed and borderless windowed mode, and you can tweak the field of view, which ranges from 80 to 100. In the advanced option menu, we have things like texture cache size, texture compress, which saves on video memory but reduces the quality of textures by some degree, max PPF, whatever that is, shadow resolution, depth of field, screen space reflections, haze flare, and additional quality settings as it's called. That last one rolls things like texture filtering, shadow complexity, and lighting quality all into one setting, which isn't very good. It would have been nice to tweak them all individually, but there you go. Audio settings could also be better, as you can't adjust the volume of all the different elements like music, sound effects and voices separately. You just have this one master volume slider and the ability to mute music. As for controls, you can toggle mouse smoothing. I don't know why you'd ever enable that, but it's there if you want it. Aim, sprint and crouch all have the ability to either be toggled or require the button to be held down, and keys are fully rebindable with the option of secondary buttons too. There's also controller support should you so desire. Finally, under the gameplay tab you can toggle loot hints and in-game tutorials. Overall, a fairly solid selection of settings, but lacking in some areas. It should also be noted that the game is capped at 60 frames per second with no way to unlock it, which is a real shame honestly. I believe it's because the id Tech 5 engine is hard-coded to run at 60 frames per second, as this was also a problem with the game Rage. Personally, I just don't think id Tech 5 is a very good engine. It's capped at 60 FPS, the textures take up a ton of space and ultimately don't even really look that good, and the environments are largely static with lighting baked in and very few, if any, physics-enabled props in sight. Even still, these negatives don't prevent Wolfenstein: The New Order from being a hugely enjoyable game. Yes, it's disappointing to think what could have been but never will be, but when you're storming a Nazi castle or stomping through a concentration camp in a rocket-equipped mech, you quickly forget about these sort of things and can't help but have a good time. Wolfenstein: The New Order is an absolutely bonkers game, but it's what makes it so enjoyable. It doesn't restrict itself to being realistic or grounded, and though the story may sometimes take on a more serious tone, the actual gameplay is anything but. And despite these tonal inconsistencies, Wolfenstein: The New Order triumphs as a ludicrous, balls-to-the-walls action game. Between its fairly lengthy campaign, tons of collectibles, and even an alternate timeline to play through after you've completed the game, Wolfenstein: The New Order provides good value for money despite a lack of multiplayer. If this game sounds right up your street, it's available to purchase at our shop at gamingdragons.com.